Hello and welcome to the Political Brief. I'm Molly Hall.
And I'm Florence Villeminot. Coming up in this week's edition, Emmanuel Macron promised to build a new France. We take a look at what he's accomplished after 6 months on the job.
Plus, lawmakers stand behind Charlie Hebdo, the satirical magazine receiving death threats following a controversial cover.
And Environment Minister Nicolas Hulot backpedals on a pledge to cut France's reliance on nuclear power.
Well, this week marks 6 months since Emmanuel Macron came to power. When he was running for president, the young leader promised to build a new France.
And at the heart of this so-called transformation is his reform agenda. The president has been pushing it through despite significant resistance. Anka Ula tells us more.
Since his election in May, Emmanuel Macron has kept busy, passing back-to-back reforms tackling economic and social issues. Macron's first objective was transforming France's rigid labor code. Despite street protests, his reforms were pushed through and signed into law in September. Other controversial measures include canceling the wealth tax and reducing popular individual housing subsidies. Security remains a major priority. He ended the country's nearly 2-year state of emergency by passing a new anti-terrorism law. It's been criticized by rights groups and the European Union, but has popular support in France. In a bid to clean up politics, he passed an ethics law for public servants, which bans MPs from employing family members. Today, polls show that 37% of French people are disappointed with the president's performance during his first 6 months in office. But 50% say it's still too early to pass judgment.
Now, since he was elected, Macron's every move has been closely watched. So what have been the most striking statements and images in the last 6 months? Well, according to a recent Edouard poll, 40% of people say it was when he lashed out against the so-called lazy, the cynics, and the extreme, opposed to his plans to overhaul the country's labor laws. Remarks, of course, that sparked outrage from the left and from the right.
Indeed, and Flo, we've got some other honorable mentions. They include the resignation of a powerful French military chief, and just who could forget the awkwardly long and intense handshake with U.S. President Donald Trump.
Now, the French Prime Minister has jumped to the defense of the satirical weekly Charlie Hebdo. Charlie Hebdo, of course, suffered a deadly terrorist attack in 2015 after publishing controversial cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad.
Yes, Flo, now the magazine is receiving hundreds of death threats on social media after publishing another cartoon, this of Oxford scholar Tariq Ramadan. Now, he faces rape allegations. Alexander Alcott has the story.
A rare show of unity, with a round of applause from France's parliament for the country's prime minister. For a number of days now, Edouard Philippe has been speaking out to condemn the threats made against Charlie Hebdo. He's calling for people who make them to be prosecuted.
You cannot, in our country, threaten freedom of opinion, freedom of speech, or the freedom to caricature.
The latest threats began after the weekly satirical newspaper published a caricature of Tariq Ramadan last Wednesday. The Islamic scholar is currently under investigation in France for sexual misconduct, including 2 allegations of rape. Hundreds of threatening messages calling for new attacks against Charlie Hebdo have been posted online, mostly by anonymous Twitter accounts. 3 years ago saw a huge public outpouring of support for Charlie Hebdo, after Islamist gunmen attacked its head office in Paris, killing 12 people. And politicians from all parties continue to defend it, including former Prime Minister Manuel Valls.
We need to defend once again freedom of the press, freedom of caricatures, and freedom of expression, and use the law to fight the anti-Semitism and hatred that's overflowing.
The newspaper is part of our heritage, and it's out of the question that anybody at all makes them feel the slightest bit threatened.
It's bigger than just Charlie Hebdo. It's about the freedom of the press, and that needs to be defended.
Tariq Ramadan has announced he's taking a leave of absence from Oxford University to allow him to address the allegations made against him, which he denies.
Now, the allegations against Tariq Ramadan come amid a groundswell of women speaking out about abusive behavior. Prominent French female personalities from the arts, media, and film are calling on President Macron to implement an emergency plan against sexual violence. Emerald Maxwell has the details.
The headline reads, "Mr. Macron, are you on our side?" In a letter published in the Journal du Dimanche newspaper, 100 French women from the arts, film and the media urged the president to act against sexual violence. Emmanuel Macron's government is working on a bill that could outlaw harassment against women in the streets, but activists are calling on him to go further.
Our society is saying that it's sick and tired of sexual harassment. And if we want to put an end to it, because it's not unavoidable, we need the government to mobilize at the highest level.
It comes after a series of allegations of harassment in France in the aftermath of the Harvey Weinstein scandal. Last week, thousands of women raised awareness by taking to the streets across the country. The letter's signatories say 1 in 2 women has been a victim of sexual violence. And in an online petition, they outline a series of priority measures to tackle the problem. Journalist Julia Foyce, one of the women behind the letter, says these measures are necessary to change the culture.
We need to double government subsidies for victim support groups. We need corporate training for all staff who may come into contact with victims, such as the police, doctors, teachers, magistrates, etc. We must teach non-violence in secondary school, because it's at that age that you teach students to respect other people's bodies, and that no means no.
Since its launch, the petition has garnered an average of a signature every second.
This week, the far-right National Front Party has been under pressure following an article by the leading French daily Le Monde. The newspaper's headline read, "The National Front, the far-right party, turns a deaf ear to women's complaints about harassment." The article outlines claims from several women who say they were morally abused or threatened by members of the party. Here's the party's leader, Marine Le Pen, responding to this article.
I found the article in Le Monde newspaper extremely outrageous because there's no harassment in either of the two cases. Everything is being muddled up. It's simply about 2 couples and 2 separations that went wrong.
Now, staying with Marine Le Pen, Flo, the National Assembly has lifted her parliamentary immunity. This for a series of pictures she tweeted back in 2015 of Islamic State group violence. Now, Le Pen could be fined some 75,000 euros or even face up to 3 years in jail. Now, Le Pen has called it a politically motivated move, saying that it violates her freedom of expression. She also says that France is softer on IS members than their opponents.
Now, Environment Minister Nicolas Hulot is backing down on promises to slash France's production of nuclear power. About 3/4 of the country's electricity comes from its 58 nuclear plants. When he was campaigning, President Macron pledged to follow a law that caps nuclear electricity at 50% by 2025. Now, Hulot is now saying it's unrealistic.
It will be difficult to reduce the share of nuclear power to 50% by 2025, unless we relaunch energy from fossil fuels, when we already made the decision, and we stick to it, to close coal-fired plants by 2022 to fight against climate change.
Well, Nicolas Hulot has drawn a lot of criticism for his change in stance on the nuclear issue. When the environmental activist joined Macron's government, he was seen as a political outsider who could push for real change. Well, critics say he's simply falling into the ranks.
It's not a promise. It's not a goal of the environmentalists. It is French law. If the French environment minister is not ready to abide to the French law by 2025, what is the meaning? What is the credibility of the objectives displayed by this government?
Now, Nicolas Hulot has responded to his critics, and he insists he's not backtracking.
Some people say Hulot backtracked on nuclear power. Not at all. We will move forward. The big difference is that nothing was happening. We had set ourselves a goal, but we did not put ourselves in a position to achieve it. The 50% goal will be achieved. It will probably be shifted in time. But if I had stuck to the climate of inaction that was prevailing, we would never have reached it, neither in 2025 or 2030, nor 2035.
Next, France's National Assembly is searching for ways to cut costs. Now, the goal is to slash the parliament's €550 million budget by €1 million this year, 10 million next year, and 15 million each following year until 2022. And Flo, some of the belt-tightening measures being floated around, well, they're raising a few eyebrows.
Well, Molly, some of them are quite incredible. For instance, they want to cut the amount of paper they're using by encouraging lawmakers to use tablets. And then they also want to cut the cost of hotels by encouraging lawmakers to use Airbnb or share flats. Some lawmakers say this is a ridiculous idea. Others seem excited by the idea of bunking up with other lawmakers.
Hotels in Paris are very expensive. What are the new MPs across all parties asking for? Sometimes to live with flatmates. When there are 3 of them, for example, they suggest sharing a flat instead of booking separate hotel rooms each night. It will help the Assembly to save money, and it will be much easier. Some of them have even suggested we use Airbnb.
Moving on, France has a new emissary for promoting the French language. President Emmanuel Macron named the award-winning author Leila Slimani to the position. Her appointment continues Macron's trend of opening up the government to civil society. Now, the Franco-Moroccan writer won the very prestigious Prix Goncourt last year for her novel Chanson douce, or Lullaby.
Indeed, and now, Flo, we've also got the president who's doing his part to promote French culture, this on a trip to the United Arab Emirates. Emmanuel Macron on hand for the opening of the Louvre in Abu Dhabi. The president called the museum a bridge between civilizations and religions.
Nothing is more urgent or more important than promoting culture, education, and beauty. Beauty itself can educate because it inspires us to look outside of ourselves, to aim higher, and beauty teaches us that we exist to act, but also to contemplate. Beauty brings us face to face with our human condition in a world that often seems to bring out the worst in us.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time on The Political Brief.